Good, Mark. How are you today?
Good. So you can see me okay, right?
I see you good, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
So how's the day so far, Mark?
So far, excellent. How about you?
Oh, it's awesome here, Mark. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to have you today on this interview, Mark.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So, Mark, Distant Thunder, your self-titled debut album was out on November 18th. So would you like to tell me a bit about the songwriting and production behind this new album?
Sure. Well, The Distant Thunder is a project that Joe Cerisano, who is the singer and songwriter, and I'm the instrumentalist engineer, put together. It started about 4 years ago during COVID. I learned how to use Logic. Are you familiar with that program? A
Yeah,
lot of musicians use it,
yeah.
right? So for me, it's like a $2 million studio for $200. And I learned how to, I spent 2 years just working on it. We had written the songs. And I said to Joe, I'd really, rather than use musicians, and this is a problem, and I've spoken to many producers about this, and maybe you can relate to it. The thing about using studio musicians, no matter how good they are, they play to impress each other, right? So you're trying to, and they all want to be in Steely Dan or
Yeah.
Toto, So I've worked with Toto, so it's like they're really great players, but the kind of stuff that I write is just very primitive, and it's kind of like put your 15-year-old self out there, pretend that and that's always been hard because it's a lot to ask from professional musicians, and it never really worked out for me. So I said to Joe, well, look, I can do all the instruments, and well, it'll sound just how I want it. And he's got a studio up in Jersey. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. And so we spent about 2 years, getting the tracks down and recording. And then we were really fortunate. We were offered three record deals, which is, I was shocked. One is like shocking, right? And we took one with Deco Warner, and the album came out, and we're just thrilled. It's fantastic. It's everything we dreamed of.
Amazing, amazing. And talking about the album, 10 amazing, mind-blowing songs, beautifully written, great musicianship. You guys just took us back almost 40 years back. The beautiful
Yes,
it's
yes,
fantastic.
yes. I'm not old. I'm the last man standing. So is Joe.
So it's a beautiful album, to be honest with you. I really enjoyed each and every song from this album. So thank you so much for putting up an amazing album this year.
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled. I am really, well, I'm getting goosebumps. Okay.
As the creator of this album, how is your thoughts and how do you feel about the outcome of the music?
Okay, well, I'll say this. The music is really for adults. It's me and Joe trying to recreate that feeling tone that we had growing up. Okay, so we were growing up listening to Creedence,
Yeah.
Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, and Neil Young. I mean, come on, right? So this album lives in that universe. It's a serious. Often it's one of my favorite songs are "The Boxer" by Paul Simon. You familiar with
Yeah.
that song?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then "Free Man in Paris" by Joni Mitchell, the song she wrote about David Geffen, and "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down." I would say those are three very influential songs. So a lot of the songs are narratives of the character. Like there's a song called "Distant Thunder," and it's about a guy, in my mind. It was kind of inspired by "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down," about a guy who is basically leaving this woman that he loves, and he knows he's never going to come back. And "Distant Thunder" is the death knell. But it's interesting, and but I think overall the song that most captures the spirit of it is called "Healing Hand." And Joe and I lived in New York City through some really, really horrible times, a lot of racial problems and stuff like that. And of course, you know, we're distressed about the way the country's going. There's a lot of hate out there. And we wrote a song called Healing Hand. And the interesting thing about it is Joe is a hillbilly. And I'm talking about like a hillbilly, like really, that's where he comes from. He comes from the hollers of West Virginia. And and so we're thinking about, you know, what can we write as a healing song, right? And we came up with Healing Hand, and it goes, I was born a white man in the hills of West Virginia. That's Joe, right? I dreamed I was a black man in Selma, Alabama. It was 1961, and in the early morning sun, I was marching for freedom. Repair what's been broken, bring back what was taken. The dream has been shattered, the promise forsaken. The waters are rising all over this land. Everybody's searching for a healing hand. And that's kind of that's what we're looking for. We're looking for, you know, life is hard for everybody. I don't have to tell you that. And we just wanted to convey that rather than give in to anger, try to be compassionate. You know, we're parents. We've tried to raise our kids with compassion. I was raised in a fully integrated school. I wrote When She Was My Girl. Bruce Springsteen just covered that. And the reason I could write it is because I grew up in an integrated school. I was spending weekends with Black families in their homes. They were inviting me to barbecues, you know. So soul was just a second language. And so was living among people who were, you know, culturally from different backgrounds. So I was blessed in that regard. And that's what kind of this song conveys, you know, that everybody's struggling. And the other thing is the trauma of when we were young, you know, we had John Kennedy was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, Martin Luther King was assassinated, John Lennon and Malcolm X. So it was like every 6 months, you know, we were in like, oh my God. And that really informed our generation. We just really feel that life is so precious and it's so precarious, you know, and I think this album conveys that. Yeah.
Beautiful. And did you do something special on November 18 on the day of the release?
I wish I could say I did. I just felt a great deal of joy because I love Deco and I love how the record came out. That's an unusual story. You know, in New York City, you know, I worked as a producer since I was like 17 years old. And one of the records that just killed me when I was going to school was Tea for the Tiller Man by Cat Stevens. Yep. Wild World's on that. I mean, just so many great songs. But the thing about it, that beside all the great writing and everything else, was the sound of it. I just was enamored with the sound. Okay. And working in New York City, even with I'm talking about just great engineers at the power station, you know, I couldn't get this sound. And it's a personal aesthetic, you know, it's like how you wear your hat, you know, wash your, you know, do you have a beard, a mustache? Anyway, so I just love this aesthetic. And I went on Fiverr. Do you know Fiverr?
Yep.
Okay, right. And I found this guy in England. And I said, you know, I'm just going to send him a song to master, right? And see what happens. And it was charging $10, you know, usually it's like $700, right? So it came back, and my wife is Jean Neary Luke, is a music producer and an artist, but she spent a lot of time producing music, much of which is for music for television commercials. And anyway, so I think she's the best producer I know. I mean, Phil Ramone has cut my songs. A lot of famous people have cut my songs, but she hears things as an artist would. She sees music. It's very interesting. Anyway, so I played it for her, and she goes, "This is incredible." And I said, "Yeah, it's $10, but this guy's in England." So, you know, it's just that aesthetic, you know, back in the 80s, I have to fly to England, you know, and now I can just send it to this guy and he sends it right back to me, and it's miraculous. So I definitely recommend, you know, I use Fiverr a lot for graphics and stuff like that. The many, many talented people, singers. And anyway, so this mastering thing is just amazing. I'm just astounded because I know a lot of the listeners have grown up on the internet,
Yeah.
you know, so me, I'm like, duh.
Okay. And talking about the music, like, do you both plan to do some kind of touring in the United States or any plans in the future?
Well, we just signed this has been really critical. You know, I've always felt that the music is cinematic. You know, I have friends who are pretty well-known directors, you know, and I always felt this music would appeal to them, and it does, because it's really, it's the big screen, you know, it's like Yellowstone on the big screen, you know, it's like, it's that kind of music. It's Western music, Americana Western music. And so this will be interesting for people who are songwriters out there. So I was determined to find someone who could place the songs in film and TV and commercials. And I called so many of my friends, and everyone was kind of, not everyone, but all but 3 people were reluctant to give me names. And these are like really good friends. It's like, I'm not trying to date your sister, man. I'm just trying to, you know, just give me, and I couldn't get them. And finally, 3 of the people gave me a list of names, right? And I got in touch with one guy who I thought was the best. And I called him and I said, look, man, you know, I really love to hear the work. And he said, you know, Mark, I know you. 47 years ago, I was introduced to you by a mutual friend. I was like, I hope I made a good impression. What am I going to say? You know, so we're about to sign a deal with him. And what I think is going to happen is these songs will be in films. I wrote a song with a group called the Slim Kings.
Yep.
They're a New York band with Liberty DeVito, who was Billy Joel's drummer, Michael Sackler-Berner, who writes music for Sons of Anarchy.
Yep.
And the bass player is Jay-Z's bass player. I mean, they're phenomenal. And it was in 3 shows. It was on Nurse Jackie, it was on Bloodlines, and another show that never made it. And I never really pursued licensing before, but now that this album is done, I really did a lot of research, and probably Monday we'll be signing the deal. So I have a feeling what'll happen is it'll be in films. And then at that point, if there's enough interest, I think we would put a band together. And, you know, a lot of our friends are pretty well-known studio guys. You know, it's a very small community, especially in the 80s when I was producing a lot of music for TV commercials. So it would, you know, and so basically these guys are, you know, still around, and there aren't as many gigs. So I'm sure that they'd love to come on the road with us if that's going to happen, but we'll see.
Interesting, interesting. And back in 1981, for the Four Tops, you wrote a song, When She Was My Girl. And
Yes.
Bruce Springsteen has recently picked up that on his covers album, and there's
Yes.
some up really amazing. Bruce Springsteen is awesome. He did it awesome. So how did you feel about Bruce taking this song and putting out in this album?
Okay. Well, I'm going to feel very differently than most people, because to me, he's like a familiar guy, and I'm going to tell you the story. Okay. So first of all, 3 of my friends are singing on his record. They never told me that they cut. I guess maybe they didn't know I wrote the song, because it's not like, you know, you go around and, you know, oh, you have a t-shirt, I wrote this song, you know. It's just like I keep my mouth shut about anything I do. I'm on to the next thing. So they probably didn't know. But anyway, so it's a small community. Okay. Now in 1981, when the record I just got nominated for a Grammy. Yeah, the record was a hit. I just got nominated for a Grammy. And I started working with a young girl named Rachel Sweet. She was originally on Stiff Records, and Columbia picked her up. And we were working on her album. It was very, very intense. And anyway, she said to me, this is really a riot. I'm sitting at the board in the power station. And she says, Mark, take a break. I'm going to the ladies' room to make myself look better. She's like 18 years old, like, okay, great. And I want you to go out and just hang out in the lounge and just relax. Okay, so at the power station, they have these little banquettes, okay, in the lounge. And I'm there and the TV's on and I'm watching, do you know the Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason? And I'm just cracking up. I'm just dying. And I don't know who her guest is, right? So this guy walks in and he says, hey, you seen Rachel? I go, well, she's in the ladies' room. She's expecting someone, and she's, getting herself ready. Why don't you sit down and watch the Honeymooners with me? Right. So we're sitting down, the two of us, and we're just cracking up like a bunch of knuckleheads, That was Bruce Springsteen. So when I heard Bruce Springsteen did the song, I was like, this is just a weird thing. It's karma. Now, thing about Bruce doing it is, the Four Tops, if you see their video, they're on Friday nights, right? Live. They are the most studly guys you've ever met in your life. I mean, Levi, forget it, man. The guy just oozes charisma. So the way they do the song is, it's a song about a breakup, right? This girl leaves this guy, right? And he's lamenting, right? But Levi Stubbs is the kind of guy he's never going to want for companionship, right? And so the way he sings it and the way it comes off is like, she's gone, but you know what? Next. It's really, there's not a lot of pathos in it. And it was written really as, I'm sure you've had experiences where you're in a relationship and things go wrong and maybe you even contributed to it, right? And this woman who you were in love with all of a sudden dumps you, right? And you're just like, oh my God, what did I do? And there's just like, that is the feeling tone of the song. It's kind of like Thunder Road. Thunder Road, he goes, the screen door slams, Mary's dress waves. Well, the screen door slamming is basically goodbye, buddy. And the wave of her dress is really the wave, And so Springsteen really got that pathos. I just, it's more like, it was written. I think the Four Tops took it to a magnificent place. But how actors do, it's like if you see Pacino in a role or De Niro in the same role, they're going to be playing things differently. And Bruce really got the pathos in this. And when I heard it, I just was, my wife and I, we practically started crying because it was so emotional. First, because I'm such a fan of his going way back. I mean, when I met him that day, I had 2 copies of Born to Run. The first one I wore out. I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? And then, there he is in the studio with me, yucking it up. And now my friends are singing with him, so it's very strange. So it is very emotional for me. It's kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe, at this late age, something like this is happening. I have an album coming out, The Distant Thunder, on a label that I love, Deco Records. And Bruce cut my song. Oh my God. Now I wrote this song with Larry Gottlieb, and just Larry and I started writing together when we were 23. Now, and he's written a lot of stuff with me. We wrote Hands Across America. We've written hits for the Manhattans. We actually did a record in 1981 called Street Justice, which is a classic hip hop record. I was very interested in hip hop after I heard The Message. So I just dabbled in that. Anyway, he's an incredible writer. So he was in New York and we were writing together for years and years. And then he said, Mark, I've had it. I'm going down to Nashville because it's more of a songwriter's town.
Yeah.
And I was just having a ball working with my wife, producing music for advertising and writing. I don't know if you're, I love the fishes because it's so delicious. Gone goldfish. I wrote that.
Amazing.
I wrote a ton of stuff. I was hanging out with Sugar Ray, you know,
Yeah.
and they asked me what I'd written. And then they said, well, keep telling me. And I said, I wrote, I'm going to Disneyland, right? And they all got on the floor and bowed down to me. My daughter was there. I was like, guys, get up. So a lot of the stuff, you know, and the difference between working for advertising agencies, like you've seen Mad Men, right?
Yeah.
So these guys are smart and they're funny and they're appreciative and they have tons of money. So basically, when I was working, it was like, well, what would you like, right? And then you would compete. There'd be like maybe 20 submissions and you'd compete. And, you know, the odds were about 5% you would win, right? So you just keep doing it. And it was just a joy to be around these people because the record business is more like World Federation Wrestling. And the people that you meet are really like Donald Trump. I mean, really, you know, they'll tell you anything, you know, and it's just, it's a war zone. Whereas the people in advertising are doing business, you know, so they have to get it done and they're incredibly appreciative and they're quite erudite, you know, I mean, they're just brilliant. So the difference between working for a record company is that you have all these nervous people looking over your shoulder who are not creatives. And then you have an artist whose chances of actually having any success are 3%. Yeah. I've done the math on this, 3%, 97% of the acts for major labels don't make money. Okay, so now you're holding somebody's hand because they're trying to do this creative project, knowing that the odds of having success are minimal. So it's just, and the record companies are not really lavish with the money. So that album that I was talking about, I did with Rachel Sweet, was $89,000. Okay, that was in 1981, and we were recording at the Power Station and using all these great studio guys. Okay, it took 6 months. I made $5,000. 5,000 over 6 months, man. Anyway, 2 years later, I met my wife and I began doing music for advertising. And we did 2 radio spots in one afternoon. Guess what the budget was? $89,000. I was like, yeah. You just hire the best players, they come in, hire the best singers, they come in, and it's like you're working with great engineers, everybody knows the job, there's no fooling around, you know. So, oh man, it was the best. So what I was doing was I was spending about a lot of time working on these major advertising campaigns. And then in the meantime, I would write songs. And the beauty of writing the songs when you don't need the money is there's not a lot of pressure. So I wrote this song with a guy named Ken Cummings, who produced Sting and Eric Clapton on the Les Paul album. And he's an incredible drummer and a singer. So we wrote this song for Whitney Houston. I had access through Clive Davis, and Ken had access as well through Clive Davis. Clive Davis was one of the early supporters of mine. He was just amazing. Anyway, so in case your listeners don't know, Clive Davis signed Bruce Springsteen at Columbia, and then he signed Alicia Keys at his own label, right? I mean, he's just a big fan. Anyway, so oh man, I lost my train of thought. That's what happens. Oh, okay, Larry. Okay, so we're working. So, the song. So what happened is Ken Cummings, you know, Clive passes on the song. Now this happens, songwriters, the chances of a song getting recorded are just infinitesimal, right? So we just know that. Okay, so Clive goes, I don't think this is good for Whitney, you know, and we're like, okay, what are you gonna do, right? So anyway, Ken was meeting with Chris, I forget his last name, from Mike and the Mechanics, you know that band, Mike and the Mechanics? Yeah. And Chris was going to be producing this gal named Jennifer Rush, who was a huge star in Europe, right? and he was looking for material. So Ken was in his office, and Ken said, I wrote this song with Mark. This is how it goes. He does the drum beat, which is, he's an amazing drummer, and he sings like Stevie Winwood. And the guy says, well, that's great. I'm going to use that for the album, So now we have a cut with Jennifer Rush, and it becomes a big hit. Okay. So this is when the wall was coming down in Germany. So I went. It was just a very exciting time. Anyway, so 6 years later, this is another thing. I lived in this very remote part of Nicaragua overlooking a beach, right? We had electricity about 16 hours a day. We put in internet, and it was so slow you could like see the zeros and ones going across. It's like, I think we got 2 megabytes. It was like mine now is 500. And anyway, so we're hanging out. We were doing a lot of charity work down there, and it was beautiful. And so we got the internet going, and I Googled myself. I had never Googled myself before, and I saw Celine Dion cut the song Jennifer Rush sang, and she did it in French, and it's on her greatest hits in French box set. So it's kind of like you just never, you never know. It's just a crazy, crazy thing. Springsteen doing this, the fact that I know the 3 singers in his band, it's just crazy,
And Mark, you put up a lyric video for Healing Hand, but do you have any special plans to come up with an official music video from this album?
Yeah, there is one. I'll send it to you. Send me. Yeah, it's an amazing video. I worked 3 years on it with a producer, director, editor in Hollywood. And it's a masterpiece. The guy just was incredible. So I will, if you send me your email, my email's marcblatte@gmail.com. And I will get you that video because it is absolutely stunning. It's like I told the guy, I said, I don't want it to be like a kid video. I want it to be like, if you go to the Museum of Modern Art and you see a video there, that's what I want. And that's what it's like. It's just mind-boggling. And so I'm very excited about that too. It's just a very exciting time, it's just, woo.
Fantastic. And what would be some of the upcoming plans for you?
Well, I've been spending a lot of time working on old songs that Joe and I wrote, because we have this, we're going to have this deal with this guy, and a lot of these songs would be great for movies. So I'm spending an awful lot of time revisiting those. It'll probably take me a couple of more months. And after that, we'll just see what happens. Larry called me from Nashville. Now, Larry, this guy I told you about, right? He's my writing partner. He hasn't called me to write a song in 20 years. Okay. But, now, about Larry, let me just say this about Larry. He's an incredible songwriter. How incredible is he? Okay, we got nominated for a Grammy for Best R&B Song. He won a Grammy for Best Country Music Song. That's how good. So what happened was my wife and I were watching the Country Music Awards, and I hear the song, and I'm just, well, you know how it is when you hear a song, it's just like, oh my God, like You Ought to Know, or Roxanne, you're just like, oh my God. Oh, Brass in Pocket is another one. So I'm hearing the song. It's like, you know what? Larry's down in Nashville. I'm going to call him up, see what he's up to, because I hadn't spoken to him in a while. I say, hey, Larry, I'm watching the Country Music Awards. There's this song on. It's Believe Me, Baby, I Lied by Trisha Yearwood. And man, it's killing me. And he goes, oh, I wrote that. Very taciturn, he doesn't tell you anything unless you. So the fact that he called me the other day, he said, Mark, I'm stuck on a song. Would you mind helping me finish it? And I was like, oh, what an honor, sure. I never thought you'd call, never thought you'd ask, because The Distant Thunder is just such a separate project. And for 10 years, I stopped writing music. I wrote a novel called Humpty Dumpty Was Pushed. And it's based on, in the early 80s, I produced hip hop single called Street Justice. And it's got lots and lots of views on YouTube. It did really well. It blasted all over New York. It was on Profile Records, Run DMC's label.
Yeah.
And I loved hip hop, but I felt, at the time, I just felt I really couldn't connect with the artists that I was working with. A lot of them couldn't read. It was rough, I mean, these are guys from the projects. They often show up late. They can't read. I mean, it's just a different culture, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. Right. But in 1990, this guy called me to do a string arrangement for an R&B record.
Yeah.
And I did it. And I really liked him. His name was Mighty Mike Logan. I said, Mike, what do you really want to do? He goes, man, I have this artist and I want to put her out. I want to have a hip hop label. So my wife and I at that time had more money than we knew what to do, because we were working so hard. We were working 16 hours a day. We were writing for Pepsi, Coke, the US Army, you name it, and we were working really hard, and we had no place to spend the money. It's just like you're working all the time, right? So we said, oh, why don't we take a shot at this and we'll finance this hip hop label. Okay. So we have studios, and this all happened through hard work. It wasn't like, it's like you're building like you're doing now. You're doing your thing and you're hoping for the best. And very often that doesn't happen. So we had these studios, and we thought, okay, well, we'll finance this thing, right? And it turns out that this artist, Shaqueen,
Yeah.
she's married to Gangstar now. Okay, but she was down with Wu-Tang, Noriega, Queen Pen, and they all came up to our offices and were hanging out. So in the daytime, we do Pepsi-Cola commercials, right? Or whatever, Coca-Cola commercials. And then at night, these folks would come in and hang out, right? And use the studio. And we produced 12 tracks. And at that time, you had to buy the rights because people were using old songs and they were hit rapping over it. And promotion was expensive. We lost $400,000 in 3 years. 350,000 was our own money. Okay. But here's the good part. We had so much fun doing it, hanging out, doing this. The people were just incredible people and so talented, Wu-Tang, forget it, So anyway, so what happened is that when I was 51 or 2, we lived down near the World Trade Centers and they blew up, right? And we worked with the police. We at police head at the police academy near our house for a while. What we would do is we would feed the guys who were coming up from ground zero. It was very heartbreaking because one of our close friends just died who went down there as a first responder. But they would come back and their gloves would be all melted and their shoes would be, it was obvious that nobody should have gone there. They should not have gone there. So after about 6 months, we won the Coca-Cola account, right? I was competing against Madonna and Phil Collins. But, the thing about artists is that they see the world through a very particular lens. And that's what makes them incredible. It's like, who sings like Dylan, Dylan, who sings like Madonna, So then this is the craziest story. My wife almost killed me for this. We won the account and the guys from the agency call up and they go, well, how much does Mark want for his song, for the Coca-Cola song? And I'm like, well, you're going to pay Madonna $16 million, right? You're going to pay Phil Collins, $8 million. I'll go for $1 million. I was just like, I didn't really care. By then, the Trade Center went down, the end of the world happened. I was just in the state of mind, like, whatever, And they told me basically to, take a flying leap off a high building, right? And I said to my wife at that point, I was 52, I said, can we have enough money to retire? Support our parents, our kids, and then just travel. And so for 4 years, we just traveled around the world. And the way we travel is we just take a plane somewhere and just go somewhere. Could be like Morocco, and we just meet somebody and say, hey man, what's a great place to go? Oh, go down there to Marrakesh and ask for and then we're off. That's kind of how we travel. And I wrote these travel logs and I send them back to my family and friends. And one of my cousins is a Pulitzer Prize winner. She's a writer. Yeah. And my other cousin, who she's married to, is also a really great writer. He's a National Book Award finalist and a Penn Faulkner finalist. Her name is Inga Saffron. She writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer. His name is Ken Kalfas. Anyway, so they told me, man, we really like your writing. You should write a book. I was like, really? They go, yeah, man. I said, well, right. What do I do? They go, write about what you know. Well, I was really into I knew the hip hop world inside out, from the promoters to the artists. And so I wrote a murder mystery called Humpty Dumpty Was Pushed. And it got published, and it's been optioned for film 5 different times by some really great people, like the producer and director Fred Berner of the FBI and Law and Order. It's a riot. I'm going to send it to you because it's just like, essentially, it took me 5 years to write. I had 5 different editors, and then when I got signed to a publisher, he said, "Well, I want to edit the book too." So I was like, "Okay, But anyway, I'll send that to you. And so I spent 10 years doing that. And then what got me back into writing was I mentored this guy. I mentor a lot of young kids. I mentored this guy, Michael Sackler-Berner, who wrote the music for Sons of Anarchy. He's a great guy. And he was going to put out an album. And he called me and he said, you mind taking a listen to it? I listened to it and I was like, I wouldn't put this out, because 5 of these songs are just, they're not up to speed. And he said, which ones? And I actually mentioned the ones he had questions about. So he said, well, will you write with me? And I hadn't written a song in 10 years. Yeah. And so I said, yeah, I'll write with you. And when you're writing with somebody, essentially what you're trying to do is figure out what is their essential nature. What is their brand? Right? Try to get them, distill their essence. So you're kind of like being a shrink, you're like, so I called Michael. I said, all right, we're writing tomorrow. What'd you do last night? Because I'm trying to figure out, like, you just want to relate to these people. You're just trying to get it. Like, what they do often says a lot about who they are, right? He said, oh, I went to the Knicks game with my mom and Gloria Steinem. You know Gloria Steinem? Yeah. I'm like, what? Yeah. And he said to me, man, I would really like to go out with Gloria Steinem. Now, she was 72 at the time. And I think he was 28, right? So I was like, I got a title for a song, Mike. Dirty Minds Think Alike. Yeah. So the next day we wrote it, and he said to me, I had 2 mentors, Kenny Rogers and Kenny Gamble, Gamble and Huff, Kenny Rogers. And they both told me, and it changed the way that I approached writing and made me a much better writer. They said, Mark, the first thing you need is a good concept. The second thing you need are great lyrics. And the third thing is anybody can write the music. That's what they said to me. And these are like, they would know, right? So now I'm concentrating on the words, so we write the words and then we write the music. And Michael says to me, I'm not sure I like the music. He says that to me, right? This little kid. I'm like, okay, Mike, well, listen, I got to tell you something. This lyric is, you can't mess this up. Okay. Whatever you do, you will not mess this up. So he's in this band, the Slim Kings, and they wrote the music. And 6 months later, he called, he said, hey, Mark, I have a check for you. Now, in the music business, anybody has a check for you, as you know, that's like, okay, put it in the bank, And so I said, what's it for? He said, well, the song's been picked for Nurse Jackie. It's like, wow, see, I told you, Then 6 months later, he said, I have more money for you. It's been picked for Bloodlines. So I'm like, wow. And then I spoke to him yesterday and he told me we wrote a song called Raw and he submitted into the American Songwriting competition.
Yeah.
And it's a finalist for the best rock alternative. It's called Raw. I didn't write any of the music. I just wrote the lyric and came up, with the title. I mean, I wrote the lyric with him. But that just shows you the power of a title, That's really what, I mean, Kenny Rogers, Kenny Gamble, they told me that and I was incredulous, because I was a musician first. And I always considered that was the most important thing, but I was totally wrong. There you go.
And decades and decades of making amazing music and nominated quite sometimes for the Grammy, and you have done a lot throughout your career. So how do you feel about the road you have traveled so far?
Lucky. Really lucky. I mean, when I was coming up in New York City, one of my best friends was Kashif. Do you know Kashif?
Yes, I do.
You Give Good Love and all.
Yeah.
So he was one of my best friends, right? So when we went to record When She Was My Girl, he was the synth player.
Well,
and Trevor Gale was the drummer. These are like, monsters, but we didn't have. And the thing about Kashif was so poor at that time that I picked him up at his residence. I was living in a slum on the East Village. I mean, and so I picked him up. He was living in Bed-Stuy in a basement. I mean, not a finished basement. I'm talking about sewage pipes, electricity. Anyway, so we went up to the studio to record When She Was My Girl. And on the way back, I said to him, Kashif just went from orphanage to orphanage and foster family to foster family. So he didn't really have, the way he comported himself was not typical of anybody because he had just such a unique upbringing. So I thought, oh, well, on the way back, I'll call my mom and let's see if we can have some dinner with her and Kashif can meet her and just see. She just lived in a plain ranch house. It was no big deal, right? It's in a place called Bedford. It's a wealthy community, but our house was nothing spectacular. So, okay, so I introduced my mom to Kashif, and he at that point he was so polite that I couldn't believe it. He was like, "You ever watch Leave It to Beaver?" Eddie Haskell. Yeah. Hello, Mrs. Beaver. How are you? That's how that was. Kashif was. I was with my mom. I was just like, "Who is this guy?" So. Anyway, she shows him around the house and it's just a ranch house. Okay. I'm telling you, it's not. And he's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. There's a fireplace. Oh my God. He looks back. Do you own all the woods back here? The whole thing is an acre, but meanwhile, he's going crazy. Okay. So then 4 years later, he buys the Jackie Robinson estate for $5 million. The Jackie Robinson estate is 20 minutes from my mom's house. That's Kashif. So what I say, and so these kinds of the synergy happens. Like I was telling you about Street Justice hip hop song. Okay, I did that with 4 guys. Each one of them became huge. Now at the time they were just like, hey, I'll do it for $25. You know what I'm saying? So the first guy is Jimmy Braylauer. Jimmy Braylauer wound up playing on 400 hit records, I think old records. He's the guy who plays the drums on Higher Love.
Wow.
But back then, he was doing us a favor and coming in and playing he used a Linn drum at that time to give us a beat. The other guy was Jay Rifkin. And Jay Rifkin at that time was an engineer, but he became partners with Hans Zimmer, the film score guy.
Yep.
And he also wrote part of The Lion King. Okay. These are guys I'm just like hanging out with because nobody has a nickel to rub together. We're doing this in a home studio. And then the other guy is Larry Gottlieb, who I told you, who got this Grammy,
Yeah.
who was nominated for a Grammy with me, but also got a Grammy, for. And then the last guy, and this is the most interesting guy, is a guy named Robbie Condor. Now, Robbie Condor recently, if Barbra Streisand comes to New York, he'll back her up in Carnegie Hall. He tours with Carole King and James Taylor. But at the time, he was touring with Eric Clapton, but he wasn't really working a lot, So I said, hey, Rob, can you give me the family price? Can you come over and put some synths on? You should listen to this record, Street Justice. It's amazing. So he put down the synths. He used an Oberheim. Back then, that was what he used. Okay, so now I'm in this home studio, and it's, 5 cents worth of God help us. I can just tell you that. And Doug Morris calls. You know who Doug Morris is? He's the chairman of the board of Universal. Back then, he was the president of Atlantic Records, and he was a big fan. He and Clive Davis were big fans of our writing, and he had Laura Branigan, Gloria.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had asked me to write a song for her, and I did with Larry, and I thought it was great, and it was called Sharpshooter. It's in this movie called Body Rock.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I went over to Eddie O. Eddie O owned Plateau Records. His artists were Salt and Pepper, right? That's Eddie O.
Yeah.
And I thought he had the best ears in the music business. I just thought I loved him. And I just, before I wanted to give it to Doug, I wanted Eddie O to hear it to see, if I thought it was great, but he might not think so. And then I'd have to do some rethinking about it. Oh, he goes, oh, that's a smash. That's a smash, which is very rare for him. So I sent it to Doug. Then Laura calls me up and she sings me the song, and she sounds amazing. So I'm thinking, oh my God, this could be a hit. This could be a hit. And I said to Doug, I'd really like to produce it. And Doug said, no way. No way. So anyway, that day I was recording Street Justice, Doug called, and he said, Mark, I'm so excited I have this song, Laura Branigan, that I want to play for you. And he played it for me, and it sucked. Okay. And I was shaking with rage. I wanted to just reach across the phone, just, what do you shake them up? How could you do this? You fucked up my song. Anyway, so but I tell him it's great because, right? It's like, hey, he's a sponsor. What am I going to do? And I get off the phone and I'm just shaking with rage. And this guy, Robbie Condor, who was traveling with Eric Clapton at the time, says, he's a very sensitive guy. I think his parents were Holocaust survivors. So he's like really super tuned in. So he said, man, Mark, you're really upset. What happened? And I told him, and he said, man, this business really can tear the heart out of you. And this is his words, not mine, because I never think of myself in these terms. He said, I've been touring with Paul Simon, and I've been touring with Eric Clapton, and you write as good as those guys. This is Robbie. I'm like, what are you kidding? Okay. So he said, you know what I'm going to do? I've been doing jingles, sessions for advertising, and I'm making it. When I do it, I make a ton of money. And I know this woman who has this music house called Look and Chapin. Her name is Jean Neary Look. And Rob says, I'm going to introduce you to her, and you're going to make tons of money and have lots of fun. That's my wife. And I'm still having fun.
Amazing.
So that's how these things happen. It's just really, you just never know. When I first came to New York, I was superintendent of a building. It is a real slum. And so I used to wake up at 8 in the morning and do the halls. And by 12 o'clock, I also did plumbing. At that time, the Bowery was just I think in LA there's like Skid Row. It was like Skid Row, but I advertised in a paper called the Soho News,
Mm.
and I get a call for plumbing, because a lot of people at that time were living in lofts because it was cheap. Nobody wanted to live in Tribeca or Soho or the Bowery. I mean, it was no man's land. So I go to this place. This guy says to me, "Can you fix my sink?" I'm like, "Yeah, man, sure." So I fix his sink, and I tell him it's going to cost $95. He goes, "Hey, well, my mother's going to give you a check." That's how broke he was, right? And so, we're the same age and we're hanging out, right? And he says, "I'm playing in a band." I'm like, you hear that all the time, right? In New York, everybody, or they're waitresses, actresses playing in a band. So I was just like, and I was just, believe me, I was nobody. So he said, "Why don't you come check us out at CBGB's?" I'm like, "Okay, man." But I just was like, eh. And he goes, and come on, I want you to meet the singer. And it's Debbie Harry.
Wow.
She's reading wrestling magazines. And the guy was Chris Stein, right? Now, 4 years later, I'm in a studio, a real studio. And I run into them. And I'm like, "Chris, what's going on?" I had no idea what was happening. I didn't know Blondie, they were big in Europe, but I had no idea. I was like, he's just telling me, "Oh man, we're big in Europe and everything's great. Say hi to Debbie." And I go over to Debbie, and she's writing a letter she's gotten a letter from one of her fans' fathers who said, "My daughter is practically suicidal. She's very depressed. She would love to hear from you." So Debbie Harry was writing her this beautiful letter. I mean, that's what these people are like. They're just amazing. So I said, "So what are you doing in here?" He goes, "Oh, we're recording a song." I said, "Oh, great, man. I wish you lots of luck." We hug, whatever. Heart of glass.
Wow.
So what I'm saying to you is, it's like this very small community. It's not like, oh, I'm somebody special. I'm just a bunch of knuckleheads trying to, trying to get by and just being nice to everybody. So that's kind of what it was like. Same with Kashif. I had no idea. Kashif one day said to me, I played him the song called Touch and Go, and he's 22 years old. He doesn't have two nickels to rub together. And he looks at me and he goes, "Mark," he goes, "you're going to be big." I'm like, this little guy here is telling me I'm going to be big. Is he putting me on? Because he's all serious and everything. I'm like, he must be putting me on, because, people aren't that nice in that business. It's very competitive. And he was like, yeah, he was really serious. And I was cracking up. I was like, it's like, somebody, two bums on the street, and one says to the other, "Oh, you're going to be big." And you're like, really? What are you talking about? Yeah, that's kind of,
Wow.
anyway, that's the world,
Yeah.
and so going back to Bruce, so when I think of Bruce, I don't think of him as this superstar.
Yeah.
I think of him as the guy I watched the knucklehead and I watched the Honeymooners with, right? That's how I think of him. It's like so immediate, and then I go and look on the album, and my three friends are singing on it: Fonzie Thornton, Curtis King, and Dennis Collins, who I've known for 25 years. And Fonzie Thornton is singing on the Distant Thunder album, by the way. I'd rather be dancing with you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. I get it. I mean, I have to tell you, it took me 3 days to calm down. I was in, they say lottery winners, it's like when you have that kind of change, I mean, for any human being, that kind of instant change is traumatic. So I spent 3 days. I told my wife, I'm going to be out of my mind for 3 days. I called my shrink. I said, "This is what happened. I'm going to be out of my mind." And it took me 3 days to basically calm down, because I was just so excited. Now, the way I found out was My publisher is Mark Freed of Mojo Music.
Yeah.
And he sent me an email. It's weird because we're very close. I know him for 30 years. You know, we used to work on, we used to mentor songwriters at BMI Songwriter Workshop, which we held at Look Music, my wife's company. Anyway, so Mark writes to me, Springsteen cut your song. That's it. I get an email, Springsteen cut my song. I'm like, there are no details, right? It's just like Springsteen cut my song. So I go online, you know, and I go, Bruce Springsteen, Marc Blatte, right? Two incongruous, you know, nobody mentions Bruce Springsteen and Marc Blatte. Like, really, who cares, you know, Marc Blatte. Anyway, I see Rolling Stone. It's like, oh my God, he cut when she was my girl. So 10 minutes later, Mark Freed calls me and I say, well, thanks for the email. Why don't you just call me? He said, Mark, I didn't want to call you because I couldn't believe it. I was just trying to wrap my head around it. And Joe Cerisano did the same thing. I called him up. You know, he's my writing partner in Distant Thunder. I called him up and I said, Joe, you're not going to believe this. Bruce Springsteen cut when she was my girl. And he said, I got to get off the phone. That's what he said. You got to get off the phone. He never said that to me before. You know, he usually, you know, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, he calls me 10 minutes later. He said, you know, Mark, I was on my ass for the last 10 minutes. I couldn't talk to you. I was like, oh my God. So, you know, it's a huge thing. And to happen now with the Distant Thunder album out. And, you know, what can I say? I mean, so much about this, as in your business, is you just persevere. I mean, when you started out, you probably had an audience of what, 10? You know, now millions of people are listening to you. Did you ever think, honestly, did you ever think that was going to happen? No, I'm asking you for real. Did you ever think you'd have this successful podcast or whatever, you know? Did you think of it that, oh yeah, I'm starting this thing. Oh, mom and dad, what are you doing, son? Oh, I'm starting this podcast. It's going to be really big.
Seriously, you gotta get a life, man.
What's that?
My folks gonna say, seriously, you should get a good life, man. Get out of it.
Right, exactly. So, you know, it's like, oh my God. So the fact that this is happening is like, I'm aware of, it's like winning the lottery without even buying a ticket. That's what I say. Oh, I just won the lottery. Well, did you buy a ticket? No. So that's kind of how I feel. I just feel just so lucky and fortunate. And I'm basically just thankful, really thankful for all of this good fortune, you know, just thankful. And I heard the Maurice Gibb, who's one of my favorite writers for the Bee Gees, right? Yeah. And he said, this is after Saturday Night Fever was, you know, it must have been, I don't know how many #1 records or top 10 records. And they said, well, what do you attribute the success to? And Maurice Gibb said, luck. And I was like, Maurice Gibb is saying luck. He must know a thing or two. Because I think you know, it's one thing for me to think that, okay, I'm just this, you know, but for Maurice Gibb to say that is like, you know, Kenny Gamble telling me anybody could write the song if you have the right lyric and concept. Kenny Rogers, same thing. It's like, really? Oh, so there you go.
Amazing. And talking about the Distant Thunder, what will be the upcoming plans, like, in a sense, like, do you plan to come up with more albums in the future?
Yeah, I think the thing we're doing now is we're as I said, I'm revisiting, I'm creating new tracks for old songs. And then I think from there, you know, once we sign this licensing deal, then I think they will call us and say, so and so is looking for a song for a movie.
Hmm.
And they, you know, and then we get to write a Distant Thunder song. You know, I don't have to write K-pop, you know,
Yeah.
because basically when you start out, that's any, you know, oh, somebody's looking for a song. Oh, okay, whatever. Bette Midler. Well, I don't know who she is, but okay, you know, whatever, you know. And so now, really, the only kind of music I want to write really is Distant Thunder music. And the other thing I would like to do is if I could find a young soul singer, and I'd like to do an album of music that harkens back to songs like We All Need Somebody to Lean On.
Yep. Yep.
A classic soul music
Yep.
that I grew up with. And you know, it's funny, on the album, there are 2 Gamble and Huff songs on Bruce's album.
Mhm.
And when She Was My Girl was a hit, we got nominated for a Grammy. And I just felt like, oh, wow, we're nominated for a Grammy. Maybe I can call somebody and meet with them. And the only person I really wanted to meet with was Kenny Gamble. He was the guy. So he has 2 songs on this album. And how I met Kenny Gamble, at the time, he wasn't talking to white people, right? And I was like, oh man, I got to talk to this guy. He's my number one guy, you know? So I called his company, Philly International. And I said to the secretary, I'd like to speak to Kenny Gamble. And she's like, very dismissive. He ain't in. That's what she said. Okay. Well, you tell him I'm Marc Blatte. I wrote this song, and I'm going to call you every Tuesday at 2:00 for as long as it takes to speak to Kenny. Okay. Next week I call. He ain't in. This next week after that, 2:00. He ain't in. This goes on for 6 weeks, right? And finally he gets on the phone. And he goes, and it's just quite amazing. He goes, who this? I said, Marc Blatte. He goes, Marc Blatte. Why are you calling me, man? I said, well, you know, I wrote this song When She Was My Girl. He goes, I knew you was going to call me. I was feeling it. I heard that song. And I said, this man's going to call me. This is Kenny Gamble, right? And he goes, Marc, let me ask you something. When's your birthday? It's like, I tell him, right? He goes, oh, so you an Aquarius? Yeah. You write this song yourself? No, I wrote it with Larry Gottlieb. When's his birthday? He goes, Blatte, Gottlieb, sounds like a beer. And so I said, Kenny, look, I just want to come down, you know, and meet you. He says, well, I'm coming up to New York, so I'll meet you guys. And, you know, so much of business is being client oriented. So I asked the secretary, who basically told me he wasn't in, and I said, well, Kenny's coming up to New York and he's visiting. What does he drink? Peppermint tea with honey. Okay, so now Kenny Gamble's in the apartment, Larry's apartment. It's overlooking the UN. And we're there with Kenny, and we play him this song, Touch and Go, which is the song I played for Kashif that he said, you're going to be big. And Kenny Gamble's, you know, does one of these things. And I'm looking at the guy and I'm thinking, every minute he's here, he's probably making $100. I mean, his clothes, I mean, he looks like he has an African king chair in his office on a platform. So when you go in to talk to him, you're just a little nobody, and you know, he's up here talking. And he really looks like royalty. I mean, he's very handsome and he's dignified. I'm incredibly dignified. Anyway, so I said, Kenny, well, would you like something to drink? He says, well, what do you have? I say, peppermint tea with honey. He goes, Like, I can't believe it. He said to me, "How did you know that?" I go, "Well, I asked, I knew you were coming." So a lot of characters, but he was the one guy that I felt more than anyone had the most original concepts. If you think about Me and Mrs. Jones or
Yeah.
his first hit, Expressway to Your Heart, I mean, being on an expressway to your heart, I mean, oh my God, So I was thinking in terms of writers. I mean, I love Don Henley. I love him. I love Bruce. I love Sting. The people, Joni Mitchell is like her and Dylan just exist in a separate universe. But in terms of pop culture, I mean, the guy just has these ideas. Me and Mrs. Jones, Get on Board the Love Train, If You Don't Know Me By Now. All of these songs are just so precise. They're immaculate, like him. You look at him, you go, oh, he writes a song. Yeah, he's an immaculate guy. So, I mean, what can I tell you? You get to meet somebody like that.
Yeah.
I produced Kenny Rogers. I mean, it's like, what can you say? I was producing Kenny Rogers down in Nashville, and he said to me, I said, I'd written a song, and when I'm producing somebody, I basically stand next to them when they're singing the song, because I just try to make them feel relaxed, and just we goof around and stuff like that. And so one point he says to me, "Hey, Mark, how do I sound on this?" I'm like, "Kenny, you're Kenny Rogers. You're Kenny Rogers. Okay. Now you sound amazing and much better than I could have ever imagined. So just remember, you're Kenny Rogers." Very modest, he's a modest guy. So these people are just such beautiful people. Mark Cohen, Mark Cohen. So he's a good friend. From before he got famous, he was doing sessions. Just the nicest possible human being you can imagine. Michael Bolton.
Yeah.
We're really close with Michael Bolton. And when he was the biggest star in the world, one of our friends had a crush on him. And she ran a charity called Face Forward, where doctors go around the world and they fix people's, faces with cleft. And she wanted him to sing at the charity event. And we called him up. I said, "Mike, can you come to this charity event?" He goes, "Yeah, I'll do it." And he sang at the charity event. And then she wanted to meet him. So he was performing at Jones Beach, which is a New York theater. And afterwards, he spent 20 minutes talking to her. And another thing about these guys, I wrote "This Is Not Your Father's Oldsmobile" with Larry. This is not your father's Oldsmobile, right? And they wanted to have a blues guy, a guy who can sing rock, do it. And Mike was out in San Francisco with Journey writing songs. And my wife called him, and she can be very persuasive. She's just great. And she said, "Mike, look, we got to do this thing. We've won this Oldsmobile account. They want this." So he said, "Well, look, I'll fly in and sing it." So he took a flight. He got to the office at 9:00 at night. I played him the song was a minute, right? And within 15 minutes, I just was like, wow, okay. So I said, "I think we're done, Mike." He goes, "No, I'm not done." And I'm like, "Mike, I've been up since 8 this morning and I didn't go to bed till 2 in the morning. I thought, I just want to rest. It's fine. He goes, okay, why don't you go sleep on the couch and I'll let you know when I'm done. 2 hours later, he wakes me up. I'm like, this is what these people are like. You know, Billy Porter?
Yeah.
Yeah. He sang our wedding song.
Wow.
Now, he first came to New York and I was hanging out with a group called the Family Stand. Um, I needed a singer, male R&B singer, and they said to use him. He was 23, he just come to New York. And he sings the first minute of the song, and I asked the engineer to stop. And I look at him and I go, you're going to be a star. I was like, this guy had it all. He's a great looking guy. He's a Shakespearean actor. Sometimes you can just tell. But I will say that everyone who I've worked with that's like super famous is super nice. Really, really, really nice. Johnny Kemp just got paid.
Yeah.
He was a good friend of my wife's. And one night he came in to sing. Oh, we were doing a charity event and he came in to sing the song. And I was weeping. First of all, because he's so amazing. And second of all, that the charity was for a farm in upstate New York that takes kids in who are very troubled, that he would do that. It's just like these people are just so generous. So my experience has always been, whether it's the guys in Sugar Ray bowing down to me, I just thought that was, and my daughter was there. I think, it's just like, oh my God, and or whether, it's Kenny Rogers or Michael Bolton come in or Mark Cohn. I mean, these people are just so generous. Levi Stubbs. Just so, that was a good lesson to learn. The gatekeepers, as you know, they're nasty. Because they're not blessed. They don't have that talent. They're just basically playing defense. So that's hard. You have to, in any career, you have to bypass the gatekeepers and go to the people who are the decision makers. And that's what I would recommend to anybody who's, say you've written a song, okay? You're a 23-year-old kid, you've done a track, you've written the song. What are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to contact the artist that you think would say it's Bruno Mars. Okay. Well, you would try to get to Bruno Mars. You would call his manager. You would call him every day, just like I called Kenny Gamble, until this guy, you would send him champagne. You'd send him presents until eventually you cracked. You cracked the case. And that's what's required. It's just super duper persistence, just persistence. I mentor kids. Some have done really well. 2 of them have done really well. A guy named Dan Sammartino, he just got the Silver Lion Award for Best Music in Advertising from Con, and Michael Sackler-Berner. And I tell them the key to success is ego sublimation and understanding your place in the social matrix, which basically means you're just the guy who's supplying songs. And there are a lot of people who can supply songs. What is going to differentiate you? I've always felt this. There are just a lot of great songwriters out there. What is going to differentiate me? And it's my willingness to tenaciously pursue people who can help me. I'm very tenacious, very, very tenacious. And also I've just always networked like crazy. And I also, grateful. Like we just had to do an instrumental, and I needed to get an accordion player. So John Cobert played with John Lennon,
Yeah.
and Harry Chapin. And I called him up, and I emailed him. I said, you know, I need you to put accordion on this. And usually with our friends, they say, well, I'm going to give you the family rate because it's coming out of our pocket, right? And so I said to John, well, can you give us the family rate? And he wrote back, the family rate is free. I'm not going to charge you for this. You know what I'm saying? And so I sent him a lot of beer. Sorry, that's my phone. I just want to turn it off. So, you know, so as I was saying, I mean, the whole thing is just goodwill. You just have to have a lot of goodwill. Just put it out there and just say yes. Somebody says, I got this guy a record deal, and I'm sorry, I'm turning my phone off. This is very complicated for me. And he didn't take it. The guy was going to sign him. And then he said, well, no, I want more money. This artist, right? And the guy said, I can't work with you. And I was just like, all you had to do was say yes, and you'll have a record out that's promoted. But a lot of artists, especially the ones who don't succeed, just shoot themselves in the foot constantly because they think there's something. I don't know. They think they're worthy, right? And I have this story. When She Was My Girl was a #1 record, Jay Morgenstern called me into his office. He was chairman of the board of MCA Music. And this is what he said to me. He said, well, this is how the conversation went. And it changed the way I think. So I was 30 years old, which is very young, you know. And he said, hey, Mark, 6 months ago, before you had this #1 record, what were you doing? I said, well, I was just writing songs. He goes, right. And nobody heard of you, right? Right. You were just some idiot, right? And I was like, you know, again, it's like a Doug Mars thing. Right, Jay, I was just some idiot. Right. And he goes, and now you have a #1 record and you're a genius, right? And I go, well, I wouldn't say that, but this is how he's talking to me. He goes, and guess what? In 6 months, when that record's off the charts, you're going to be an idiot again. So I said to Jay, I'm just going to skip the genius part and I'm just going to stay an idiot. And that is the whole thing. You know, it's like my wife used to say, I was the easiest person to work with because no matter how successful I became, I just was like an idiot. You know, it's like, okay, whatever you want. Oh, you don't like this song? No problem. You know, you don't like this part? No problem. I just say yes to everybody. Oh, hey, Mark, you want to write with me? Sure, man, you know.
Amazing, Mark, amazing. And Mark, I want to thank you so much for giving me today this wonderful opportunity. It's a real pleasure and honor to meet you today. And thank you so much for putting up an amazing album, Distant Thunder, this year. And thank you so much for all your amazing contribution throughout your lifetime for music and all the wonderful things you have done so far. Thank you so much for that. And I wish you all the best in the coming days and looking for more great things from you, Mark. Thank you.
Okay. Send me your email and I'll send you some stuff.
Definitely.
And it's just been a pure joy to be with you. And congratulations on your success.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. Take care and have a wonderful day ahead.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.